As most of you know, my name's Christopher Luft and I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie. Before we jump into the podcast, I just want to talk about Cybersecurity Cares. About 10 years ago, I had a simple idea that the tech community could come together to support worthy causes around the holidays. Over the past decade, with the help of over 100 companies, we've raised over $350,000 and collected over 12,000 pounds of food for people in need. This year, we are supporting the people in cyber who are helping people in cyber. Our industry faces unique challenges, things like burnout, mental health struggles, lack of diversity, and the pressure of staying sober in a culture that often revolves around alcohol. But lucky for us, there are incredible organizations working to solve these problems. They just need our support. For the first few weeks of December, we're raising money through our website at cybersecurity-cares.com and then wrapping things up with a 12-hour live stream telethon on December 18th. We're bringing together 5 amazing nonprofits, Sober and Cyber, Mental Health Hackers, the Diana Initiative, Black Girls Hack Foundation, and the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu. All funds raised will be split evenly between these organizations. Last year, we raised over $35,000, and this year I know we can do better because this community shows up when it matters. Join us at cybersecurity-cares.com, follow us on LinkedIn, donate, share our message, sign up for a slot on the live stream, or talk to your company about sponsoring. Let's make some noise and let's take care of our own.
I don't want to be a sales guy. However, I do want to make sure I know what all services we're doing, where the limitations at, what's going to be a pain point for my team. If this customer comes in and they list out these requirements, being able to understand what that impact's going to be on the SOC is, really nice. Cause I'm sure all of us have been in those states where all of a sudden you get blindsided in onboarding that they had some crazy off the wall request that doesn't fit any of your processes or procedures. And now you're, adapting quickly and trying to keep yourself afloat.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast, where we talk to the people who keep the internet safe. These industry experts share their innovative cyber defense technologies, vital insights into threats, and predictions for the future of cybersecurity. My name's Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. This podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for SecOps where everything is built API first. Scale with confidence as your business grows. Start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. My guest today is Alec Fenton, a seasoned cybersecurity professional with over 15 years experience across multiple areas of IT. Alec has built a career focused on navigating complex security environments with a strong track record in both technical analysis and leadership. He's held senior roles at organizations including Deepwatch, SS&C Technologies, and now serves as VP of Security Operations at Foresite Cybersecurity. His experience spans managed service providers and private enterprises, giving him a broad view of cybersecurity challenges and operational risk. Alec is known for his hands-on leadership approach and his emphasis on cross-functional collaboration, especially between security and help desk teams, an area he frequently highlights as a critical gap in enterprise environments. Thanks so much for being with us on the show today, Alec. It's a real honor to have you.
Yeah, good to see you again, Chris.
Yeah, we've been talking quite a bit lately.
Yeah.
Before we get into it, I'm always curious about how people found their way into tech and how that turned into a career in cybersecurity. How did all of this come about for you?
Yeah, essentially, being a little bit of a nerd in the early 2000s usually meant you were hanging out on Newegg, putting computers together, trying to find the cheapest, best way to, stay up on the latest games. And that did give me some kind of crash courses into, how to survive in that space. And YouTube was so new back then. You didn't have as much instructional videos, so it was a lot of trial and error. So we, kind of got into a little IT support through that of just figuring out how things work, how to, get them as functional as possible. And usually with this, least amount of money spent as we could, being 15, 16 years old at the time. And then it kind of just, I started working in restaurants and going to school and different things like that, and just didn't really have much of a passion for anything that was going into that space. And coincidentally, I had some friends that went into the military, and I decided, not to do that route. But then when they came back, they were like, yeah, we definitely don't want to do that anymore, but we're thinking about IT. And, coincidentally, one of them ended up moving up to Omaha, Nebraska, and he offered, he's like, I've got a couch you could stay on. We're working at this company, and, I think they might be able to hire you in. You don't need, too much experience. You have enough hands-on to at least know how to troubleshoot things. And then it's kind of progressed kind of quickly. Though I did join in right around that 2007 timeline, and actually joined PayPal at the time up in Omaha, Nebraska, which was always kind of a ironic thing for me that it's, all the help desk for that company was pretty much ran out of Omaha, Nebraska. But when you called into PayPal, you usually go into India and the Philippines, and then we were troubleshooting their computers most times. So got a pretty good hands-on experience doing the across the ocean type troubleshooting and getting things set up and efficient. And that was part of my first foray into the cybersecurity space via incident response actions. Back then, just being the help desk, we were mostly just the note takers for the timeline. But it was kind of an interesting field, and over time, kind of evolved.
I was going to say that sounds a lot like one of the classic routes into cybersecurity. I've heard people say several times, in how valuable that time on the help desk is as you progress through your career in cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's always a good feature. I like to try to get into into the new analysts, is seeing like where they've worked at, even if it's not in cybersecurity, knowing that they've even worked at restaurants, so we know they can handle a little bit of stress and a little bit of chaos, and then also you're kind of striving for that good flow of process and procedure so that you're getting things in order. But then also how to adapt when something falls on the ground, some 0-day drops, very similar parallels, I imagine. Trying to find people with those kind of real world experiences are really useful. And then I find help desk is also really nice to be able to, we have a hypothesis on something that's going on, but if you don't work in those spaces, or you haven't worked in those spaces, it's kind of hard to justify things sometimes. But folks that worked in help desk, typically we'll kind of look at a log pattern and start seeing like, oh yeah, no, I think I know what that is. They're going through this process and they're clicking this way instead of putting their credentials in this way. And, it definitely helps with troubleshooting and diagnosing root causes. So it's really nice.
Awesome. So you've worked across managed service providers and private companies. Do you see differences in how the SOCs operate in those different environments?
Yeah. Obviously with the private companies, regardless of how big they are, there's still going to be that look that security teams are a cost center. There is a lot that you're paying for, that kind of peace of mind and, risk tolerance and catching those things and trying to get proactive. But on the old company side, you have to, hit the bottom line, protect the crown jewels, but also try to be as efficient as you possibly can. So it definitely gets to a little bit of a stress on that. But then when you're on the MSSP, MDR routes, it's, it's still a factor. You want to be as, cost efficient as you can. But you also get a little bit more leeway on, pulling in more resources or constantly, making your processes better, stronger, faster, and then kind of more on the relationship building. But there's definitely parallels, I imagine, for both sides. There's working with other teams. On a corporate scenario, you might be fighting for the same budget, so it's kind of like you have to put some of those things aside and work for the common good. And then the same kind of happens on the MSSP MDR side. It's I've been a part of some companies where you would talk to one end of the company and it sounds like a whole different, set of problems, and kind of even the company they're working for. And it's, you're supposed to be, going for the same goals. And sometimes it just gets very competitive. So it's, you lose sight of the overall picture. And thankfully, cybersecurity is very predictable that inevitably there'll be a major incident. And that usually brings teams very close very quickly when you're sharing those 5 o'clock on a Friday, frantically trying to get through something, or you're doing something more large scale, like a Log4j type drop in the middle of December that, you probably just lost your Christmas and New Year's and so on. So it's, some definite differences, but also some good shared comparisons, I imagine.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from folks over the last year, at least probably longer, how many enterprises are turning more and more back to MSSPs to handle their security because the operational costs in-house are much higher when you're trying to keep a small team together versus an MSSP that's maybe hiring for multiple contracts.
Yeah, that does kind of add that extra benefit. As we see kind of over the last, we'll say 10 plus years, there was machine learning and automation orchestration engines and so forth that really helped with the enrichment. But then you'd see that kind of struggle for like an MDR company. They have, maybe extra resources because they're spreading their coverage across multiple customers. So they can kind of experiment more, get more refined on processes. And you get that kind of lessons learned, experience, because there's all the threat intel and all the use cases that are created for detections. but sometimes that human element of the experience you've had and like how that enriches your service is, compounds very quickly. When we have like an MDR customer with 200 plus customers, there's a pretty good likelihood that you have a very similar shared customer somewhere where you can say, oh yeah, you have the same tech stack, you have the same workflows, you have the same potential impact if you're in the same industry or vertical. So we've seen some good comparisons there, but it is that kind of that's probably one of the biggest advantages is you can do more of that refinement, the tuning, the experimentation. When you're on a private company, you tend to run into that time and cost factor of constantly being a bit behind the gun. You have a limited amount of resources, limited amount of time, and you don't really have that luxury of having hands-on experience in other environments. You're set to your own, which
right.
Hopefully folks get really familiar with their own environments. But it's always good to have that second set of eyes as well, where you're kind of sharing that kind of almost like fiduciary responsibility with your MSSP MDR company, where you don't feel so alone at a midnight incident breaks out sort of situation.
Mm-hmm. And in an enterprise, every breach you're learning from happened to you.
Yeah, it's a little more right to the heart type situation versus
So you list that your philosophy is to lead from the front. I'm a big fan of that sort of dirty boots leadership. What does that mean in day-to-day reality inside of a SOC?
Yeah, I mean, that is always that kind of struggle for like the management versus, front line is, the delegation and, teaching people to be, self-sufficient, because you don't want to be so micromanagey that you're constantly, just, oh, here, move aside. Let me put my hands on keyboard and take over. They're not going to, get that experience. But having someone that's seen, wide ranges of attacks, financial impacts on companies and teams, and keeping a calm state usually is really useful to have as both like a coach and a mentor and manager. And then I've always kind of felt like the reluctancy to be in the management side, because I know when I started, I wanted to be more hands-on, analytical, and so forth. And when I got into cyber, it was around like that 2011, 2012 time period. It felt like it was still such a new thing that we really just had people managers that were, shift leads that just took attendance, took, your reviews and stuff like that. And there was always this lost in translation moments of like when an incident was being described, you could, put it in bullet points or long-winded explanations, but you might still lose some context. And that was probably what really drove me in the, wanting to get into the management side, was to kind of make things better than what I came up with. Having to constantly, correct things or have, those in reports when you're working shift work, where you send off your, nightly report and you come in the next day and find out that it got misconstrued or misunderstood and turned into a bigger issue than it needed to be. But luckily over time, it seems like cyber's kind of evolved into that, where there are more hands-on people that also can, be personable, can talk with people, can deal with the mind-numbing paperwork and HR compliance items. But yeah, there's always those fun regrets, and you feel like you're the the type of analyst when you came up that you're still like waiting for that opportunity to be begrudgingly brought back into the front lines. And over my career, it's like even as a director, VP, and so on, it's not uncommon that I'm having to get hands dirty or jump onto a terminal to help out when something's really being I don't know, it's spiraling out of control type situation.
Right.
And, I think most of the team really appreciates that it's not just me sitting there going, get this done. And, I can't, do it myself if something happens. So it's, it's definitely been a big one for me to try to, be that advocate for, being on the front lines, being able to do the work if I had to, not putting it all on my team, make sure it's kind of that shared load and that we're all working towards the same. And I feel like that does a lot for just team morale in general, even when things are terrible. And, I've been at companies where you're having a riff every 3 months and, the security team, gets a lot on that. The help desk and security teams typically are the ones that know beforehand, and they're having to prep things. And you're maybe, you're talking to the person next to you and they're not going to be in that cubicle. And it's, it takes a big toll on security teams and IT teams in general. And, trying to keep morale up. A lot of it is just, keeping the calm, keeping the, the boat sturdy in the same direction, and that, we're all just kind of marching to the same drum.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have any advice you'd give to analysts who aspire to grow into SOC management?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just to be able to communicate at different levels. So it is always really important to not get stuck in those kind of like echo chambers of your friends and family and coworkers, like branching out and like talking with customers, talking with CSMs, sales guys, trying to make sure that you're, speaking the same language, or you kind of have those, communication lines that you can kind of go back and forth on and not, lose things, or, kind of bring them into your team essentially, and try to be, transparent and learn from each other. Cause I know, as someone that was big on the hands-on keyboard, I don't want to be a sales guy. However, I do want to make sure I know what all services we're doing, where the limitations at, what's going to be a pain point for my team. If this customer comes in and they list out these requirements, being able to understand what that impact's going to be on the SOC is, really nice. Cause I'm sure all of us have been in those states where all of a sudden you get blindsided in onboarding that they had some crazy off the wall request that doesn't fit any of your processes or procedures. And now you're, adapting quickly and trying to keep yourself afloat. So that's definitely a big one for people coming into it, is just be able to be adaptable, learn quickly, be curious. Is always a great one. Like I love seeing it when people like have those different tags, those tasks going on, those alerts, and they're jotting down notes of things they want to go back and look at and kind of deeper dive in. Because I know with most SOCs, it's time is money type situation. So if you're spending 15, 30 minutes on an alert, you have to have some justification, not just curiosity at times. And then just trying to find that passion for it, because that's always a big one. Though I've seen a lot of people back in the day going through those quick universities and boot camps, but they just don't have a passion for it. So they don't have that curiosity or drive, which can still be valuable. Like even if someone's there and they want to just be an analyst 1 and 2, and that's where they're happy, and they like to keep expanding, but at a slower pace. It's kind of to each their own, and they all do have value. So it's been, I don't know, nice to see.
We talked about that recently. I think maybe on Defender Fridays. This idea where in cybersecurity, it's like, to be successful here, you almost do need a passion and need to do some work on your own hours and spend the extra time, which on one hand is a little bit unfair, but it's just, there's a lot of passionate people. So if you're, working in a meritocracy, and you're just going to have to compete with people that really care about what they're doing. So.
Yeah. And I think that's another like kind of leadership tactic I like to use, is trying to get people those kind of like paid time on opportunities, or you might call it like sharpening your axe, your sword, whatever analogy you like. But giving people that kind of opportunity. So a lot of times with my analysts, we try to work with the managers to schedule out like either like a 4-hour or even a whole day if you have the bandwidth, just to like focus on essentially whatever you want. So sometimes it's as simple as if we're working from home, it's like, go walk your kid, walk your dog, go out, catch up on homework. If you're in school, catch up on, general stuff, so that you can, have some extra cycles. Cause it does help morale a lot. And then it also inadvertently kind of highlights the people that are like, oh yeah, once they have that 4-hour, dedicated time, they're drilling in on getting their CYSA, they're getting their, advanced certs in different areas. And, you see that progress going really quickly. Because a lot of the analysts, I tell them it's kind of, you're at a create your own adventure right now. You can go as fast as you want. Like, I'm not going to let you run off a cliff type situation and burn yourself out. But like, there's a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different certifications. And I recommend for everyone to get as hybridized as they can. Like being the guy that only knows one piece of technology, like used to get you lasting for, 10 plus years. Mm-hmm. Now it's kind of like, ooh, you might only get 3 to 5 out of that one piece of tech. The market's changed quickly. So getting people involved with like multiple areas, like on our EDR teams, like making sure we have, CrowdStrike and SentinelOne expertise, but then also diversifying them and getting them into the other consoles that they're not so familiar with, and seeing if we can kind of have that lessons learned model in an MDR space to say like, oh yeah, what's working in CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, Defender, and name any other product, and can we take those lessons learned and those wins and replicate them either on our side or make suggestions for those vendors. And most times it ends up on our side where we can kind of, get some similar some similar actions or automations in place that mimic those service offerings and keep us kind of all in the same line where, a customer doesn't have to have, the best and brightest setup and the most, advanced modules and so forth. There's always kind of ways we can improvise those things or, make other solutions that might be cheaper or just more efficient for your specific environment. But
yeah.
Hey, it's Nicole from the LimaCharlie marketing team. Many security teams deal with tool sprawl, dozens of different solutions that create gaps in visibility and slow down response times. Our SecOps Cloud platform consolidates your security stack into a unified platform where everything works together. LimaCharlie gives you comprehensive endpoint visibility and automated response capabilities in milliseconds instead of minutes, so you can stop threats before they spread across your environment. Try our scalable infrastructure for your security services for free at LimaCharlie.io.
Yeah, you mentioned burnout. I know that's like a very real thing in the SOC. I think anywhere in technology, like it's common. Do you actively engage with folks when you see that they're starting to show signs of burnout? Like how do you handle that as a manager?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a lot of it is, giving them those breaks from the front line. I think it is kind of those wartime analogies. Like someone's on the front line too long, they're going to just have their bell rung and they're just going to gloss behind the eyes type situation. And giving people time away and other side projects and things like that. Because I know when I was an analyst, it was kind of you grabbed whatever you could. There was always thousands of alerts, so you could be working 5, 10 at a time. And it was rare to get those projects, but every once in a while you would get something where there's some new thing coming out, and it makes me feel old when I'm like, oh yeah, when AWS was new, the cloud environment, security was having to adapt, and taking the time, and I had to do a lot of it obviously on my own spare time, like digging into other areas for like cloud, for Qualys, for Tenable, and all these different things, but it paid dividends for like the service offering and my own knowledge, so it was always nice to see. But yeah, burnout's definitely a real factor because you have, you're always continuously doing certifications, technologies are changing, adapting new, add-on features and so forth. And then of course you have the red side going through, or the attackers, creating new, fun tactics that they're going through, mapping out MITRE and, where does it fit? How far, to the right or left on MITRE is it? How big of an impact? So it's, it keeps you on your toes for sure. But I know with some folks that does, create that burnout where you just can never feel like you're sitting still.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned alerts there too. I know they're often flooded. Like that's a thing we hear a lot from people in the space, is just like this overload, and how do we reduce false positives, and how do we fix it? What strategies have you found to be most effective for reducing noise and keeping analysts focused on what matters?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it does get into that, treating your SOC analyst as that kind of security advisory role for a customer. So a lot of times we don't have like dedicated TAMs as a position, but we have it as a function. So the analysts all kind of cycle through, get customers assigned to them, so they can kind of be that advocate there. And that kind of helps them with the, explaining, where the tuning opportunities are going to be, and where's the, pain points and visibility. And how do you get as efficient as possible? Because it is mutually beneficial for both the customer and us to focus on the real nitty gritty things that are going to be a problem for them, and can equal dollars and cents against their bottom line, and potentially take users off. So it's to build that trust is a kind of a hard thing sometimes, because I know a lot of people say it, and I use it all the time. Is that whole like building trust with the customer. You gain it in droplets and you lose it in buckets. So it's like it takes a lot of time of like good work, good response times and so forth to build up that relationship. And usually we see it as like they feel that partnership. Customers are into that line of like, yeah, we can't even respond to that many tickets, so we need to focus in on these areas, and doing roll-ups and automations. A lot of times we'll try to take some of the noise and either create like auto send rules or auto contain rules that might help with it, and measuring a customer on what their collateral damage tolerance would be it locking down a user that's not a VP level or some whitelist or blacklist action on there. I'd rather have the account locked out for 15 minutes and potentially stop an attack than let it continue and get worse over time.
Right.
So we do a lot of work with that on like the relationship side, and I feel like that's kind of where most MDR companies probably should be focusing on, because that is kind of the nature of the game. It's expensive to bring in a new customer because you are dealing with a lot of time and onboarding and trust to build up to that point, and then you kind of have to deliver those first 3 months. You don't want to give a bad impression and have to build up from it. Mm-hmm. So it's always good to keep those customers that have been there for years on end. Like you don't want to let them leave off just because something was cheaper or better. Like you want to at least be it that it's, significantly cheaper, and then hopefully they see that it's a lesser quality as well. But it's a hard balance for sure to kind of, keep the relationship going while also attracting new customers at the same time and not letting your service degrade. Because I know I've been in some NDR companies that had the kind of the startup mentality where it's growth over all else. And then you sit there with, 200 plus customers, you're heading towards 100 million. And then slowly every customer that's been with you for over a couple of years is dropping out. And, it can spiral very quickly. And, a lot of times I see companies chasing, AI over human, staffing. And I definitely get it on a cost perspective. But to me, it's always been one of those like AI, automation, machine learning have always been like a tool to like make the analysts more efficient. Like you're still going to need that human element. And that's kind of what we focus on my side is to put in, keep our staffing as low as possible and kind of in tandem put in automations, always improving, continually looking at like MTTX metrics to find where would be a good fit to have like an automated task here or put more of these things frontline to the analysts in the beginning instead of having to have them build something from scratch. Though I'm also a walking contradiction at times because I also want to give people the opportunity to build those from scratch from time to time. And I hate to lose all of it. So a lot of times we'll even do like post-incident cleanups where we start with the same incident and do all the things by hand to show how those were made by automation, because I feel like we kind of lose that sometimes. And I worry that, in 5 years, there'll be analysts that don't know how to read a log file without going through an AI prompt, and the AI prompt goes down. It's just, it gets a little rough.
Yeah. We've seen like a lot of attack shift, I think, from purely technical to like social engineering and insider threats and stuff like that. What do you see as the most worrisome trend today in what's coming through the SOC?
I think a lot of times it's over the last few years, it has been troubling how many avoidable problems are out there, because we kind of, with how many things are moving very quickly on both the customer and the MDR side or private security, you're chasing the next shiny thing or the next implementation. And all of a sudden you see that kind of degradation or tech debt building up, and you start seeing, just those, the fundamentals kind of, degrade over time. And you see, conditional access not set up fully, or you made a compromise with a business unit and all of a sudden MFA wasn't turned on in certain areas and you didn't get a chance to go back and look at it again. So you see these kind of increases in just account compromises. And, 5-10 years ago, you were seeing more of those like 0-day exploits being the main entry point. And now it's just keeps trending towards the phishing and social engineering aspect because it's the easier route. And, I think as, defenders, we're constantly kind of on our back foot adapting to, the next new thing. And, right now, the biggest one being AI. And I always kind of, let analysts know it's like, we kind of have to use this because attackers are going to use it and they have a far better ROI on the work they're doing. Like pretty minimal costs, they just have to get one. If they
can run experiments, and if they hit it once, they win, where, we have to get board approval or whatever to bring new technology and have to be right every time. Yeah.
It's always the rough part there. But there is also lessons learned and seeing kind of how attackers are using AI and, how they're adapting and how they're, scaling out is kind of a good model for like MDR companies to kind of learn from, of like, there is kind of a need to have, hands-on keyboard escalation folks, but getting your tier 1 and all your recon and your level 1 supports, into that AI space where you're, hopefully being quick and rapid and identifying those things and bubbling them up, definitely helps on the response times and helps on the, the visibility. Because I know that's always that kind of fun game of balancing, the human resources you have and the time, and then where automation and AI can be integrated can be just extremely valuable for any team, both on the MDR side or a private company. So it's just very hard to adapt to those things, but it does make it challenging and interesting for folks like us that are really into it. Because even when I'm losing a fight, it's still like it's hard not to just respect the heck out of it, of what they're doing and how quickly they're getting in there, or see some of these social engineering where it gets very intricate and it's kind of impressive. It's definitely evolved from the Nigerian prince scams and the we have your photos, give us money type situations, and have to give credit where credit's due. It's, there's always levels to it. And there are some people that are just the script kiddies going by. And there's some that are very, advanced. They're using psychology tactics, all these AI integrations. And yeah, it's very impressive. So it's, I always try to make sure to caution people.
We do a news segment on this show, and it's very hard sometimes not to tip the hat. I don't want to give the bad guys any credit, but there's a lot of innovation there for sure. Recently, we were just talking about one where they were using AI to generate Lua scripts on the fly when they landed in an environment to like go do retrieval and stuff. And like, yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little bit impressive. I don't agree with what they're doing at all, but that's innovation for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So what metrics do you look at to judge whether the SOC's running healthy and effective? Certain KPIs that you could share out to folks that are maybe trying to understand if their service is running properly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the MTTX metrics can be just very useful, because obviously going from like the mean time to detect, you can really see where your use cases and your SOAR processes are hopefully keeping up, because I've seen people lose track on those sometimes where you don't realize that there's an automated task that should be taking 2 minutes all of a sudden started taking 20, and maybe we didn't account for scalability on it, and we're seeing those kind of delays happen. And you start getting those delays in processing can start being an impact to the customer, where you want to have as close to real-time detections as you can, but you also don't want to have to make things manually from like an IKEA furniture type situation. You want to have a delivered product. So trying to, balance that, making sure you have your engineering side is all caught up and things are running efficiently. And then you get into like the mean time to acknowledge, how available your analysts are. Is there, time and delay for like hitting those certain SLA metrics, and then, notifying the customer. Cause sometimes, you see that kind of trend where MDR companies go back and forth on measuring what they present as their SLA is either a mean time to acknowledgement where an analyst touches it, takes control of it and gets ready to send it out. And then some measure on the mean time to notify, on how long it takes to get to the customer side. On my end, I also focus a lot on the second acknowledgement being on the customer side. Like, how long did it take for the customer to get into that ticket, to respond to it, and then eventually have resolution for it, to keep that cycle going. Because a lot of times we see that kind of being a gap where, there's a lot of alerts coming through, the noise gets to be a bit much, and at some point the customer gets maybe distracted on something else going on. And if you just don't have that continuous feedback, you'll see it, duplicate alerts being sent, or the same case, different situation, might be a tuning opportunity. We just needed the validation. So trying to give customers as much lines in to us as possible. Obviously, like phone calls and emails, sometimes it's, difficult to get away and get those out. Mm-hmm. So sometimes Slack channel integrations can help. Just any sort of portal that's web accessible on a phone has been very useful for customers to be able to acknowledge something or say there's a tuning opportunity there, and save on extra volume that might be created erroneously. But yeah, just that kind of constant improvement there to be able to measure, see it on like a month scale. Obviously, sometimes in a SOC, it's important to also go back further. So you're not making knee-jerk reactions off of anomaly. You're looking at long duration metrics that can show like, oh yeah, this is within normal parameters. It's after a patch Tuesday, so we see Thursday's impact when we see all the scanners getting hit globally. And there's some predictability there too. Like security is not ever going to be an exact science on alert volume and things like that, but there's definitely some horseshoes and hand grenades close measurements we can do that'll kind of keep us in the right ballpark, so that we're not understaffing or we're missing SLAs that were avoidable. And for customers, hopefully they're also seeing that they're not. I feel like that's kind of been a trend lately where customer feedback is that when they're leaving an MSSP for us, they're like, we just want communication. We want to be able to reach out to you guys and not be put into a 2-week queue or, engineering requests that go to like a black hole and we just never see anything happen and get to a rough spot. So trying to keep that white glove service without having to dedicate the amount of time that requires a white glove service can be a challenge. But that definitely seems like one of the biggest areas for AI to kind of get involved there, to kind of help with the continuous engagement, the reminders. We have SOAR playbooks that'll sit there and look at those tickets sitting with a customer to see if there's an opportunity, even for myself or a manager, to come like talk with the customer and say, hey, we're noticing this trend. If this is whitelisted, we could get rid of this many alerts, and you would benefit in this space, and it looks like it's authorized, but we just need confirmation. And it ends up clearing out a lot of the volume. And I think a lot of these SOC analysts, I think that's, again, going back to the management style, like having managers and leads that are with you on that type of situation, to kind of help with, you don't have to feel that single point for an alert or, for a customer, that you have, backup that can come in and, put it in a different perspective, can sometimes help with those. So I end up doing that a lot with my folks, of just, if there's a trending issue or you're seeing across multiple customers, like we want to maybe even pull those customers into a side meeting and say like, hey, we're actually noticing this across other environments too. One, to get your feedback and get this improvement in place so that, both our analysts and your guys can focus on the real hard hitting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Great. Okay. We're getting close to the end here. I got a couple more for you. If you could redesign a SOC from scratch today, what would you do differently?
Oh, and that's kind of been the fun of my new position here is, this company had been around for a while, but it's also got a little bit of the startup mentality, because they did a switch on getting into the Google SecOps world. So I've gotten to do that a bit of like building from the ground up. When I came in, we had, 8 analysts, and now it's, double, triple that. So getting to, go through it, it's, been kind of an interesting one, and I'm hopefully doing the things I would like to do in that space. But there is always that restraint of money and so forth. But yeah, without, any money, it's, setting up those things like, the sharpening your sword, giving people extra time, accounting for that in staffing and projects, and then trying to get, building your SOC with the intent of having people hybridized to plan for those, like, the impact that AI is going to have, or the potential, economics going up or down. Like, you never know what, the ripple effects of that could be. And having people that are, a really good security analyst, but also building engineering skills, vulnerability operations, getting in the consoles, giving them as much exposure as possible, becomes a very mutually beneficial for the manager and the company and the individual going through it. And that's always kind of a big goal for mine, is to make sure, if I want to grow people internally, go from, an analyst 1, 2, 3, and so forth. But I also want to, I have a great goal of, if someone does leave the company, I want to hear the 20, 40% pay bump you got because you're an SME in this area that you built over time. And, having those stories, I never feel bad about, any sort of departure like that, though obviously you still, you're going to miss them as a person on the team. But then, the counterpoint of that is when you start seeing people leave because of burnout, and, what that does to you and how you have to adapt to it. And, you obviously can't take it too personally, but you do want to learn from it. You don't want to just sit there and be like, it's just their problem. Like, yeah, a lot of that introspective work for managers is really important. And, I've seen a lot better over the last 5-10 years, where we see people coming in and understanding what the landscape is and what the work really means and how it can impact people. And, it's been really good.
That's great. When I think back, the best managers I've ever had were happy to see me go. I'm sure they miss me in a certain sense, but to go take another opportunity and grow as in my career and stuff. So I love that you're adopting that. Okay, so this is the last one I have for you. It's the one I ask of everybody that comes onto the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a pretty obvious one that AI is going to play a big factor. And then I think, it'll be interesting to see those kind of impacts, but I feel like it is going to be really interesting to see what gets built out of it. When we see these companies building, native AI integrations, I know Google, Splunk, and every, big major player is, be heavy on that. And, for security analysts and engineers, it's kind of one of those important things to be, right abreast with everything going on, but then also thinking how you can, package those type of things, or how you can do it better, in your own processes and make it more natural, versus trying to adapt constantly. Because we see those companies chasing the next new shiny thing, but they don't really know how it operates or how it could integrate without clearing everything out that's working and starting anew. And you see people, MDR companies especially, start falling to the wayside, chasing AI as a replacement instead of AI as enrichment. So I'm hoping to see that can kind of continue, where see analyst teams on the MDR side be very minimal staffing, so there's kind of that impact. But seeing how they can scale heavier and quicker with those AI integrations, those continuous improvements, and the new next generation will probably just be wearing so many different hats, because it's going to be, such a more wealth of knowledge, like right at your fingertips with AI, where you only have to dip your toe into certain areas to be almost an expert, because you at least understand it. You can, have AI doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the, investigations and diagnoses. But, that should make for some really interesting security analysts of the future, where they're just, experts in so many different areas, and, over, a far less amount of time to get to that space. Because I know probably myself and you, 10, 15, 20 years of bruises and battle scars. Hopefully the new generation, takes 2 to 5 years to get to that level, and hopefully they don't have as much pain behind the eyes type situation as we do. But very optimistic for what that looks like.
Yeah, and I don't think we're getting humans out of the loop anytime soon. I think eventually, sure, we'll get there, but it's not going to happen in the next 5 years. Awesome. Well, that's my prediction anyway. Alec, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a really fascinating one. I haven't worked in a SOC myself, so I don't have that frontline experience, and I think there's a lot of value here for people doing that work and looking to move up to management, and folks running them, trying to figure out how to make things more efficient. So thanks for your time.
No, anytime. Great talk with Chris, and have a good one.
Yeah, take care. And that brings us to the end of another great conversation. You can support our show by sharing your favorite episode with a friend, subscribe, give us a rating, or leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one. The Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast is hosted and produced by Christopher Luft. The show is co-produced and edited by Sam Blake, with graphics by Amr Al-Khatib. Sponsored by LimaCharlie, scalable infrastructure for your security services. Visit limacharlie.io to get started for free.